There is a photograph taken in 1953 outside the Odeon Leicester Square in London. In it, Stewart Granger is standing in a perfectly tailored tuxedo, his dark hair slicked back, his jaw set at that particular angle that made women in 40 countries weak in the knees. Standing next to him, radiant in a gown that cost more than most people's houses, is his wife, Jean Simmons, the most beautiful woman in British cinema. But he is not looking at Jean. He is looking slightly to the left, toward the royal box, where a young woman in a tiara is watching him, with an expression that the tabloids would spend the next 6 months trying to decode. That woman is Her Royal Highness Princess Margaret, the sister of the Queen of England, and she is looking at Stewart Granger like he is the only man in the room. That image, that single moment, captured in the flash of a press bulb, tells you almost everything you need to know about the sad, complicated, ultimately tragic story of Stewart Granger. He was the man who had everything: fame, fortune, the most beautiful wife in the world, and the attention of actual royalty. And he would spend the next 40 years losing it all, piece by piece, until he was just an old man in a small apartment in Santa Monica, watching his old movies on television and wondering where it all went wrong. To understand Stewart Granger, you have to go back to London in 1913. Not the swinging London of the Beatles or the gritty London of Dickens, but the London of gas lamps and empire, a city still clinging to the rigid certainties of the Edwardian era, even as the guns of August were about to blow that world to pieces. He was born James LeBlanche Stewart on May 6, 1913, in Kensington, a respectable neighborhood of tall white houses and quiet, leafy squares. The name LeBlanche was a gift from his great-grandfather, a famous Italian opera singer, and it was the first hint that this was a family with theatrical blood in its veins, even if they pretended otherwise. His father, Major James Stewart, was a decorated veteran of the Boer War and the Great War, a man who believed in duty, honor, and the proper way of doing things. He was a lawyer by profession, stern and distant, the kind of father who inspired respect rather than affection. His mother, Frederica, was something else entirely. She was vibrant, chaotic, funny, and deeply unconventional. She filled the house on Kensington Court with music, with laughter, with the kind of organized disorder that drives strict Victorian households to distraction. She adored her son with a fierce, almost suffocating love, and he adored her right back. She was the first woman Stewart Granger ever tried to impress, and he would spend the rest of his life trying to find a woman who could match her. The boy who would become Stewart Granger was a problem from the very beginning. He was too big, too loud, too much. He was expelled from Epsom College, one of England's most prestigious boarding schools, for a prank involving a bucket of water and a housemaster's bedroom. The official report called it high spirits. The housemaster, who had to sleep in a damp bed for a week, called it something else entirely. The truth was that young James Stewart simply could not abide authority. He could not stand being told what to do, when to do it, or how to do it. He had a temper that could flare up like a struck match and a wit that could cut like a razor. He was clever, but he was lazy. He was charming, but he was difficult. He was, in short, a boy who was destined either for greatness or for disaster, and no one was quite sure which way the coin would fall. His mother, with that peculiar instinct that mothers sometimes have, decided that the only place for a boy like James was the theater. She enrolled him at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art. It was not a decision born of ambition. It was a decision born of desperation. Where else could you put a boy who was too handsome to be a clerk, too restless to be a soldier, and too rebellious to be anything respectable? At RADA, he found his tribe, Not the serious, dedicated students who stayed up late memorizing Shakespeare. He found the other misfits, the ones who were there because they didn't fit anywhere else. He was a contemporary of Richard Attenborough, and the two could not have been more different. Attenborough was small, precise, driven, a terrier of an actor who attacked every role with ferocious dedication. Granger was a panther, languid, watchful, capable of sudden bursts of electric energy that left audiences breathless. He didn't learn to act at RADA. He learned something far more valuable. He learned that when he walked into a room, people turned to look at him. He learned that he had presence, that indefinable quality that separates movie stars from mere actors. He learned that he could command attention without seeming to try. It was a gift, and like all gifts, it would eventually become a curse. Then came the war, and this is where the story of Stewart Granger takes its first dark turn. He joined the British Army, as men of his class and age were expected to do. He served in the Gordon Highlanders and later transferred to the Black Watch, one of the most storied regiments in the British Army. He looked magnificent in uniform. He had the bearing of a natural soldier, the broad shoulders, the straight back, the square jaw. But inside, something was wrong. He was plagued by stomach pains, crippling attacks that left him doubled over and unable to function. The doctors diagnosed a duodenal ulcer, a condition exacerbated by stress and anxiety. He was medically discharged, sent home. While his contemporaries were landing on the beaches of Normandy, while they were fighting and dying in the deserts of North Africa and the jungles of Burma, James Stewart was in London, trying to find work as an actor. He never forgave himself. He never spoke of it with anything other than a kind of bitter, self-lacerating shame. He felt like a coward. He felt like a fraud. And that feeling, that deep, unshakable conviction that he was not quite the man he pretended to be, would drive him for the rest of his life. Every sword fight, every punch thrown, every villain vanquished on screen was an attempt to prove that he was not the weak-stomached boy who couldn't handle the war. He was overcompensating, and he knew it. And knowing it only made him angrier. He changed his name out of necessity. There was already a James Stewart in Hollywood, and he was a giant. The American James Stewart had starred in Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, the Philadelphia Story, and It's a Wonderful Life. He was beloved, respected, an icon of American decency and charm. The British James Stewart could not compete with that. So he became Stewart Granger, taking his mother's maiden name and pairing it with a name that sounded like it belonged to a man who owned a country estate and a string of polo ponies. It was a brilliant piece of self-invention. Stewart Granger sounded like a star before he ever set foot on a soundstage. The early 1940s were lean years. He took small parts in forgettable films. He was too handsome, too aggressive, too sexual for the gentle, understated style of British cinema at the time. British leading men were supposed to be sensitive, poetic, slightly ethereal. Stewart Granger was none of those things. He was a wolf in a world of sheepdogs. And then Gainsborough Pictures came calling. Gainsborough was a studio that understood something fundamental about human nature. They understood that people, especially people living through the grinding misery of wartime, wanted escapism. They wanted color, passion, danger, and romance. They wanted men in tight breeches and women in low-cut gowns. They wanted highwaymen and gypsies and wicked ladies and rogues. And Gainsborough gave it to them in glorious, lurid, technicolor detail. In 1943, they cast Stewart Granger in The Man in Grey. He played Lord Rokeby, a sadistic aristocrat who mistreats his wife and generally behaves like a complete monster. He was supposed to be the villain, but something strange happened. The audience didn't hate him. They loved him. They loved the way he sneered. They loved the way he moved. They loved the dangerous glint in his eye. He was bad, and they couldn't get enough of him. The film was a sensation. Overnight, Stewart Granger became a star. But it was the follow-up, The Wicked Lady, in 1945, that turned him into a phenomenon. He played Captain Jerry Jackson, a dashing highwayman who sweeps Margaret Lockwood's bored aristocrat off her feet and into a life of crime and passion. The film was attacked by critics. It was condemned by the Catholic Legion of Decency. It was banned in several countries for being too suggestive, and the British public lined up around the block to see it. It became the highest-grossing film in British history at the time. Stewart Granger was the king of Gainsborough. Women mailed him their undergarments. They waited outside the stage door in the rain just to catch a glimpse of him. They screamed his name in the streets. He was a sex symbol, a matinee idol, the man every woman wanted and every man wanted to be. And he hated every minute of it. Or at least, that's what he claimed. He would later describe the Gainsborough films as rubbish. He said he was ashamed of them. He said they were beneath him. But the truth was more complicated. Stewart Granger loved the fame. He loved the money. He loved the adoration. What he hated was that he needed it. He hated that he was famous for being a handsome rogue rather than a serious actor. He wanted to be Laurence Olivier. Instead, he was the man women dreamed about when their husbands were away at war. That tension between the artist he wanted to be and the commodity the world demanded would curdle into a bitterness that eventually consumed him. Before the fame, before the princess, before everything, there was Elspeth March. She was a beautiful, dark-haired actress with a quiet dignity and a sharp intelligence. They met in the repertory theater circuit in the late 1930s, two young actors trying to make their way in a difficult and uncertain world. They married in 1938. He was 25, she was 27. It was a young marriage, fueled by ambition and the particular intensity of wartime London. They had 2 children together, a son named Jamie and a daughter named Lindsay. For a few years they were happy, or at least they were too busy to notice they weren't happy. But as Stewart Granger's star rose, the marriage began to crumble. He was unfaithful. He was demanding. He was jealous of anyone who threatened to take the spotlight away from him, even his own wife. Elspeth was a talented actress in her own right, but being Mrs. Stewart Granger meant living in his shadow. And as his shadow grew longer and darker, she found herself shrinking to fit inside it. He would come home from the studio, still buzzing with the adulation of the day, and he would berate her for not being glamorous enough, for not understanding the pressures of his new fame. He was cruel in the way that only insecure people can be cruel, with a smile, with a joke, with a cutting remark that left a wound long after the laughter faded. The marriage was over long before the divorce papers were signed. It was the first wreckage in the long, slow train crash of Stewart Granger's personal life. And then he saw her. She was 17 years old, standing on a soundstage at Denham Studios, wearing a white dress and looking like something that had stepped out of a dream. Her name was Jean Simmons. She had just finished filming Great Expectations for David Lean, playing the young Estella with a haughty, heartbreaking beauty that had stunned critics and audiences alike. She was delicate, ethereal, with huge, expressive eyes and a mouth that trembled with vulnerability. She was the complete opposite of the blousy, dangerous women of Gainsborough. She was innocence personified. Stewart Granger was nearly 30 years old, married with 2 children, and a notorious womanizer. And he was utterly, completely, obsessively in love. He pursued her with the single-minded intensity of a hunter, tracking a rare and beautiful creature. He sent her flowers, He gave her advice on her career. He told her she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He promised her the world. For Jean Simmons, young and perhaps a little overwhelmed by the attention of this great star, it was a whirlwind romance. She fell for him. How could she not? He was Stewart Granger. He was the king of Gainsborough. And he was telling her that she was the only woman in the world who mattered. But there was a shadow hanging over their romance. A tall, thin, deeply strange shadow named Howard Hughes. The American billionaire, aviator, and recluse had seen Jean Simmons on screen and, in his characteristically obsessive way, had decided that she belonged to him. He bought her contract from J. Arthur Rank, the powerful British mogul, for a staggering sum. He owned her professional life. He could decide what films she made, where she lived, who she saw. He bombarded her with telegrams and phone calls. He had her followed. He sent her gifts that were extravagant and slightly menacing. He was a spider, and he was trying to draw her into his web. Jean Simmons was terrified. And Stewart Granger, for all his many, many flaws, did something genuinely heroic. He fought for her. He took the money he had earned from all those Gainsborough films, the films he claimed to despise, and he used it to buy out Jean Simmons's contract from Howard Hughes. It cost him a fortune. It nearly bankrupted him. But he did it. He rescued her from the clutches of a madman, and in doing so, he bound her to him forever. They were married on December 20th, 1950, in a small ceremony in Tucson, Arizona. She wore a simple suit. He wore a smile that could have lit up the entire state. They were Mr. and Mrs. Stewart Granger, and they were off to conquer Hollywood. Hollywood in the 1950s was a factory town that pretended to be paradise, and Stewart Granger arrived with a chip on his shoulder the size of the Hollywood sign. He was not coming as a supplicant. He was not coming hat in hand, grateful for whatever crumbs the American studios might throw him. He was coming as a conqueror. He had been the biggest star in Britain. He had rescued his beautiful wife from a predatory billionaire. He had earned his place at the table, and he was going to make sure everyone knew it. He signed with Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, the biggest, gaudiest, most glamorous studio in the world. It was the home of Clark Gable, Spencer Tracy, Katharine Hepburn, and Judy Garland. It was the studio of The Wizard of Oz and Gone with the Wind, and Stewart Granger walked through the gates like he owned the place. He told the studio bosses exactly what he wanted: top billing, a fortune in salary, and only the best Technicolor adventures. They balked. They were not used to being dictated to, especially by a British actor they considered a minor import. But they looked at the box office receipts from Britain. They looked at Jean Simmons, who was even more beautiful in Technicolor than she had been in black and white, and they gave in. His first major Hollywood film was King Solomon's Mines in 1950. It was based on the classic adventure novel by H. Rider Haggard, and it was shot on location in the heart of Africa. It was hot, dusty, dangerous, and absolutely grueling. The crew was plagued by malaria, dysentery, and heat stroke. The equipment constantly broke down in the oppressive humidity. At one point, a herd of stampeding elephants charged directly at the camera crew, and Stewart Granger had to stand his ground, rifle in hand, while the director screamed, "Cut!" just in time. He didn't flinch. He never flinched. That was the image he projected, a man who didn't flinch. The film was a colossal hit. It was the second highest-grossing film of the year in the United States. It cemented Stewart Granger's image as the rugged, two-fisted adventurer. He wasn't just a pretty face in satin breeches anymore. He was a man's man. He was a hunter, a tracker, a survivor. He was the kind of man who could lead a safari through the jungle and come out the other side with a lion skin and a smile. But it was Scaramouche in 1952 that gave Stewart Granger his moment of immortality. The film was based on the novel by Raphael Sabatini, the master of the swashbuckling adventure. It told the story of André Moreau, a carefree young lawyer who becomes a revolutionary and a master swordsman to avenge the death of his best friend. It was the perfect vehicle for Granger. It allowed him to be charming, witty, romantic, and dangerous all at once. And it contained a sequence that is, without any exaggeration, one of the greatest action scenes in the history of cinema. The sword fight in the theater. It is 6.5 minutes long. It covers the entire stage, the boxes, the stairs, the auditorium, the foyer, and finally spills out into the street. It is a ballet of violence, a symphony of clashing steel and flashing blades. Granger trained for 3 months with Jean Simmons, the Belgian Olympic fencing champion. He practiced for 8 hours a day. He lost 15 pounds. He gained reflexes like a cat. On the day of filming, the set was packed with hundreds of extras. The director, George Sidney, used 7 cameras to capture the sweeping, balletic violence. Granger and his opponent, Mel Ferrer, used real swords for much of the sequence. The clang of steel on steel was deafening. There were no computer-generated effects. There was no wire work. There was no trick photography. It was just 2 men, perfectly trained, trying to kill each other in front of a camera. When they finally wrapped the scene, the entire crew burst into spontaneous applause. They knew they had witnessed something special. They knew they had made a piece of film history. For Stewart Granger, it was the peak. It was the moment he proved, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that he was the man. He wasn't acting the hero. He was the hero. The success of Scaramouche was followed by The Prisoner of Zenda, another classic swashbuckler, and a string of successful Technicolor adventures. Stewart Granger was one of the biggest stars in the world. He was earning a fortune. He and Jean Simmons bought a sprawling ranch in Chatsworth in the San Fernando Valley. It was a piece of the American dream, a working ranch with horses, cattle, dogs, and a swimming pool that shimmered under the California sun. They named it, with a nod to a different kind of American dynasty, Hickory Hill West. They had a daughter together, Tracy, born in 1956. They were the golden couple of Hollywood. They attended the best parties. They knew the most famous people. They had everything anyone could possibly want. And it was all about to fall apart. The invitation arrived in 1953. It was for the Royal Command performance of Young Bess, the film in which Jean Simmons played the young Queen Elizabeth I. It was a great honor, the highest accolade British cinema could bestow. Stewart Granger put on his best tuxedo, the one that fit him like a second skin, and he walked into the Odeon Leicester Square with his beautiful wife on his arm. He shook hands with the Queen Mother. He bowed to the young Queen Elizabeth II. And then he was introduced to Princess Margaret. She was 23 years old. She was beautiful, witty, sharp-tongued, and deeply, profoundly bored. She was the spare to the heir, trapped in a gilded cage of protocol and duty and endless, mind-numbing royal engagements. And she loved the movies. She had seen all of Stewart Granger's films, not just the Hollywood epics, but the Gainsborough melodramas. She could quote lines from The Wicked Lady. She knew the plot of The Man in Grey. She looked at him with an expression that was part admiration, part mischief, and part something else entirely. And Stewart Granger, whose ego was a bottomless well that could never be filled, drank it in. Here was a woman who was not impressed by Hollywood. She was the real thing. She was royalty. Her sister was the Queen of England. Her uncle had been the king. Her blood was blue in a way that all the money in Beverly Hills could never buy. and she was looking at him like he was the most fascinating man in the world. The press went into a feeding frenzy. Princess Margaret and film star in Secret Romance. The royal flirtation that has the palace worried. The headlines screamed from every newsstand in the Commonwealth. The palace was horrified. Stewart Granger was a married man. He was an actor. He was, in the eyes of the British establishment, a gypsy, a vagabond, a man of no consequence. And he was a commoner. The affair, if it was an affair, or the intense friendship, if you prefer the sanitized version, burned bright and brief. They were seen together at private clubs. They exchanged letters. Years later, friends of the princess would admit that she was quite taken with him. For Granger, it was the ultimate validation. It wasn't just that a princess fancied him. It was that the entire British class system, the system that had made him feel like a grubby outsider, the system that had looked down on his Gainsborough films as vulgar trash, was now bowing to him. He had conquered Hollywood, and now, in a way, he had conquered the palace. But the royal flirtation exposed the cracks in his marriage to Jean Simmons. How could Jean compete with a princess? She was beautiful, talented, and devoted. But she was not a princess. She did not have the weight of 1,000 years of history behind her. And Stewart Granger, for all his protestations of love, had always needed to be the center of attention. He had always needed to feel like he was winning. And in a marriage to Jean Simmons, he was beginning to realize that he might not be winning. She was a brilliant actress. She had received an Academy Award nomination for her performance in Hamlet. She was turning down roles in films like Roman Holiday and A Streetcar Named Desire because Stewart didn't want her to work. He wanted her at home. He wanted her waiting. He wanted her to be Mrs. Stewart Granger, the beautiful accessory. But she was more than that. She was an artist, and he couldn't stand it. He was jealous of her talent. He was jealous of the attention she received. He would belittle her acting in front of friends, calling it little girl tricks. He would flirt openly with other women at parties, humiliating her. The man who had rescued her from Howard Hughes had become a different kind of jailer. He was not a monster in the Hughes mold. He was something more insidious. He was a man who loved her but didn't know how to let her shine. He needed to be the sun. And in a marriage, there is only room for one son. They separated in 1960. The divorce was finalized later that year. It was messy. It was expensive. It was heartbreaking. For Jean Simmons, it was a liberation. She went on to have a long and distinguished career, earning another Academy Award nomination and the respect of her peers. For Stewart Granger, it was the beginning of the long slide into obscurity and bitterness. He had let go of the one woman who had truly loved him, the woman he had fought a billionaire to win. And he had done it for what? For a ghost, for a flirtation, for a brush with a tiara. The 1960s were not kind to Stewart Granger. The world was changing. The Beatles had arrived. The sexual revolution was underway. The old studio system was crumbling. Audiences wanted Marlon Brando mumbling in a t-shirt, not Stewart Granger declaiming in a powdered wig. The swashbuckler was dead. He tried to adapt. He went to Europe and made spaghetti westerns in the deserts of Spain. He stood in the dust, squinting into the sun, collecting a paycheck. He made a series of films in Germany based on the novels of Karl May. He played a character named Old Surehand, a white man raised by Native Americans, a kind of Teutonic cowboy. The films were hugely popular in Germany, but they were a galaxy away from the glamour of MGM. He was a working actor now, and he hated it. He felt he was slumming. He would berate the German crews, complain about the food, and generally behave like a deposed king who expected everyone to still bow. The irony was that these European films kept him financially afloat. They were the only reason he could maintain the ranch, pay the alimony to Jean Simmons, and keep up the appearance of being a star. But he resented every minute of it. He was Stewart Granger. He had dueled across the stage of the Paris Opera in Scaramouche. He had danced with a princess. He had been the king of Gainsborough. What was he doing in a cheap motel in Almeria, waiting for a director who didn't speak English to call action? After Jean Simmons, there was a void. Granger filled it with a Belgian woman named Caroline Lesurf. She was younger than him, attractive, and possessed a fiery temper that matched his own. They married in 1964. It was a union forged in the fires of mutual attraction and a shared love of drama. They fought constantly. They threw things. They made up. They separated. They remarried. They separated again. It was a telenovela playing out in real life, and it was exhausting for everyone who knew them. They had a daughter together, Samantha, born in 1966. But even the birth of a child couldn't calm the storm. Caroline was not Jean Simmons. She did not shrink into the background. She gave as good as she got. Friends who witnessed their dinner parties described them as psychological boxing matches, with guests trapped in the middle, watching the couple trade barbs and insults. It was destructive. It was expensive. And it was a public spectacle. By the time the marriage finally, permanently ended in the late 1970s, Stewart Granger was a man running on fumes. The ranch was a money pit. The alimony to 2 ex-wives was crippling, and his career was essentially over. And then came the book. In 1981, Stewart Granger published his autobiography. He titled it "Sparks Fly Upward," a quote from the book of Job. "Yet man is born unto trouble, as the sparks fly upward." It was a fitting title for a book that was less a memoir and more a Molotov cocktail thrown into the face of Hollywood. He didn't just dish the dirt. He excavated the landfill and set it on fire. He settled scores with everyone who had ever slighted him, real or imagined. He called John Wayne a boring drunk. He said Richard Burton was a drunken Welshman who couldn't act. He described his former best friend, Michael Wilding, as a man with the intelligence of a sheep, but he saved his most vicious, most cruel, most misogynistic bile for the women he had worked with. His description of Deborah Kerr, his co-star in King Solomon's Mines, is a masterclass in character assassination. He wrote about her body in explicit, derogatory terms. He claimed she was a nymphomaniac who threw herself at him constantly. He mocked her hygiene. He mocked her Scottish accent. He mocked her husband. It was a sustained, vicious, utterly unnecessary attack on a woman who had been nothing but professional and gracious. Why did he do it? What had Deborah Kerr ever done to Stewart Granger? The answer, as best as anyone can tell, is nothing. She had perhaps rejected an advance from him decades earlier, or perhaps, more damningly, she had simply been more critically acclaimed than he was. She had received 6 Academy Award nominations. He had received none. For Stewart Granger, that was the sin. She was a better actor than him in the eyes of the world, and he could not stand it. He attacked Sophia Loren for being common. He attacked Ava Gardner for being crude. He attacked nearly every woman he had ever worked with. The book was a bestseller, of course. People rubberneck at car crashes. But it made him a pariah. Who would want to work with a man who would write that about his co-stars? Who would want to have dinner with a man who might put your private conversation in his next book? He had burned every bridge in town, and he had used napalm to do it. The book is the key to understanding the tragic end of Stewart Granger. It is the work of a man drowning in self-loathing. He had failed as a soldier. He felt he had failed as a serious actor. He had failed as a husband. And so he tried to tear down the entire edifice of the industry that had made him. If he couldn't be remembered as a great artist, he would be remembered as a great destroyer. He would be the man who told the truth. But it wasn't the truth. It was the venom of a man who had spent 50 years hating the face in the mirror, because it wasn't the face of a hero. It was just the face of a man. The final years were quiet, and for Stewart Granger, quiet was a form of torture. He sold the ranch. He moved into a modest, 2-bedroom apartment in Santa Monica. The walls were lined with books and a few framed stills from his old movies. He had a small television set. He was diagnosed with prostate cancer. He underwent surgery. He grew thin and frail. The great voice, which had once filled the Odeon Leicester Square, was now a dry rasp. He spent his days watching old movies on cable. Sometimes they would show one of his films, Scaramouche, King Solomon's Mines, The Prisoner of Zenda. He would watch that young, vital man on the screen, the man with the perfect jaw and the effortless swagger, and he would feel like he was watching a stranger. That man had everything. That man had Jean Simmons. That man had the world. And what did this man have? A view of a parking lot and a body full of cancer. He would occasionally give interviews in these final years. The bluster was still there, but it was hollow. There was a sadness in his eyes that the sneer couldn't hide. When asked about the book, he would sometimes mumble something about maybe going too far. When asked about Jean Simmons, he would fall silent for a moment. She was the one, he admitted once, quietly, to a journalist who had caught him in a reflective mood. I was a fool, a complete and utter fool. He was lucid until the end, which might have been the cruelest part of it all. He had time to think. He had time to sit in that quiet apartment and tally up the wreckage, the failed marriages, the estranged children, the bridges burned, the legacy tarnished. Stewart Granger died on August 16, 1993, in Santa Monica, California. He was 80 years old. The cause of death was prostate cancer that had metastasized to his bones. There was no state funeral. There were no heads of state in attendance. The man who had once been the king of Hollywood, the man who had danced with a princess and dueled his way across the screens of the world, was cremated. His ashes were scattered in the Pacific Ocean. There was no star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. He had refused to pay the fee for one. Why should I pay for people to walk on my name? He had snarled. It was the last defiant act of a man who never learned to bend. What history forgot about the man in the saddle? History has a way of sorting its figures into neat, convenient piles. The icons, the legends, the villains, the victims. Stewart Granger doesn't fit neatly into any of them. He was too talented to be a villain, too difficult to be an icon, too proud to be a victim. He was a man trapped in amber, preserved in the bright, artificial light of Technicolor. He was the last of the great swashbucklers, the final echo of a tradition that stretched back to Douglas Fairbanks and Errol Flynn. After Stewart Granger, the world didn't want men in tights saving damsels. It wanted anti-heroes, men in leather jackets and existential crises. It wanted James Dean and Marlon Brando and Paul Newman. It wanted men who mumbled and sulked and questioned everything. Stewart Granger couldn't make that transition. He was too stiff, too proud, too English. He believed in the power of a straight back and a strong jaw. He believed that men should be men and women should be beautiful. And when the world laughed at that, when the world decided that those things were outdated and slightly ridiculous, he didn't have the tools to adapt. He could only rage. He could only write that terrible, cruel book. He could only alienate everyone who had ever cared about him. But if you want to remember him, forget the bitter old man in the Santa Monica apartment. Forget the cruel words in Sparks Fly Upward. Forget the failed marriages and the squandered fortune. Watch Scaramouche. Watch the sword fight. Watch the way he moves. He is not thinking about his ulcer. He is not thinking about the war he didn't fight. He is not thinking about the princess he didn't marry, or the wife he lost. He is there, in the moment, completely alive. He is a blur of black velvet and flashing steel. He leaps over the footlights. He grins that wicked grin. He is the hero. And for 6.5 minutes, he is immortal. He was the man who was nearly Errol Flynn. He was the Hollywood star who married into royalty. He was Stewart Granger. And his story is a reminder that the brightest flames often leave the deepest shadows. If this story of a forgotten star and a vanishing era moved you, please give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us keep telling these stories about the golden age of Hollywood and the complicated, sometimes tragic lives of the people who lived it. There are so many more lives worth remembering. Stars who burned too bright and faded too fast. People history tends to overlook.